Man vs. Machine has had quite the turbulent update history over the years, with much of the reception being mixed. The infinite refund system, the modern-day gas passer, nerfing already obscure weapons into irrelevancy, it's been a bumpy ride. While the vast majority of the player base don't seem to have strong feelings on most of these patches, there has been one relatively recent addition that was a target of both heavy criticism and gleeful delight. Upgrade Inspection, a feature enableable towards all of your teammates for 9 whole years, was forced into a straitjacket and became soulbound to the ever-dwindling friends list. It was a change so out of left field that a lot of people actually thought it was a glitch. But no, it was intentional. The patch clearly had noble intentions, obviously aiming to roadblock much of the toxicity that has been a long-standing headache of the game mode. But we all know what the road to hell is paved with. The debate still rages on as to whether or not this was a good or bad idea. And as time has gone on, the ramifications of this change have really begun to set in. So what camp am I in? The one that likes making money. This video was sponsored by Dragon City, a free-to-play mobile game available on both iOS and Android. Dragon City is all about hatching, collecting, and evolving dragons, with over 1,000 different breeds to choose from, each with their own unique aesthetics and abilities. These mythical creatures aren't just for show. You can test your dragon skills in PvP battles against other trainers, climbing the ranks and proving your worth. Or, for a different breed of challenge, you can go down the PvE route and take on the game's enchanting quests. Alternatively, you can just chill out and customize your own dream city with architecture and decorations of many different varieties. So be sure to download Dragon City by clicking on the link in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen, and get a special bundle with 15,000 food, plus 30,000 gold, and the rare fortune dragon to get you started. As you're all probably aware of by now, Man vs. Machine has historically been infamous for a culture of rampant hostility, usually directed from veteran players, also known as high tours, towards new players, aka low tours. The bulk of these negative interactions often relates to new players deviating from the game's meta, whether as a result of sheer ignorance or intentional self-centered negligence. These conflicts would regularly break out before the mission even began, and Upgrade Inspection was undoubtedly the catalyst. Naturally, this led to a lot of veterans using it as a vector to shit on new players who had all the game sense of a golf ball in a sewage canal, an increasingly growing problem that had been emboldened by the TacoBot outrage that surfaced in 2019. New players were scared to give MvM a try, and considering the revenue it generates, Valve needed to take action lest they lose potential dollars. Though for some reason, fixing the main contributor to this issue by simply porting over a change they already made to casual mode is off the table apparently. Regardless, Valve did take action, but given their track record of implementing changes that are little more than band-aid half measures, we shouldn't have expected anything less. And thus, by the summer of 2021, inspecting randos was no more. It was an interesting time to be an MvM player, with seemingly everyone throwing in their 2 cents as to how things would go moving forward. Looking back though, much of the more doomer takes have not aged well. The speculation of high tours forcing noobs to add them to their friends list or be met with a vote kick never really materialized. By the same token, the rabid celebration among much of the low tour player base was likewise misguided, and the community at large was about to learn what high tours were aware of the whole time. Buying upgrades was always a part of the MvM criteria, so to speak. If done correctly, you inspire confidence in your abilities. If done poorly, you make a strong case for being apprehensive. However, people seem to make the mistake of thinking that trash upgrades alone would be the sole reason for them getting kicked. But that often wasn't the case. There's more to a bad first impression than just upgrades. There's bad class selection, low tour count, poor weapon choice, tertiary points of critique such as the placements of an engineer's buildings or a demo's pre-game sticky traps, and most importantly, how that player responds to being told they're making things harder for the group. Half the time it falls on deaf ears. One might find it cringe to police how other teammates should play the game, but the fact is, you don't exist in a vacuum. Your choices can directly affect the game in a negative way for other people, and that's a factor that always has to be considered. Now, to be 100% clear, this isn't a defense of kicking anyone who doesn't pledge allegiance to the almighty meta. However, it is a defense of the entirely valid presumptions that players of all skill levels will make when attempting to briefly surmise their chances for victory. Poker is an apt analogy here. You don't technically know if your non-suited 8-3 will lose you the hand. In fact, it's very possible you win, but usually a competent player will fold those cards because we don't make investments based on the exceptions, we make them based on the norm. Man vs. Machine is the exact same way, and although there's no money on the line until the mission is completed, time is money, friends, and no one likes having it wasted. An undeniable benefit of the new system is that arguments that would occur over the most minuscule of upgrade failures have mostly been eliminated. Anything that would have otherwise been unnoticeable is now just that. Unnoticeable. Problem is, those small nitpicks were a minority of the reasons as to why newer players got kicked in the first place. It was very rare to see, for example, a heavy player get kicked for using a D tier melee, or a demo player for upgrading a few resistances before damage. They were suboptimal choices, sure, but the impact on the match would be so trivial that the vast majority of players, even stereotypically toxic high tours, didn't care. But not having dispenser range, not having projectile shield, spamming air blast, spamming knockback rage, these are by far the most common upgrading mistakes that result in new players getting kicked. And you don't need teammate inspection to realize they're happening. The patch may have made it so that hostile high tours would be less likely to kick a new player before the round begins, but what do you think happens after playing wave 1 and seeing a full wave of their buffoonery? A dickhead high tour doesn't need anything more than a death count and a damage number to justify getting you out of there. And again, I'm not defending this behavior. These high tours should treat new players with a certain amount of grace. I'm just explaining the reality of the situation. Removing inspecting doesn't remove toxicity, it just delays it. And I don't believe these meager benefits were worth giving up all the good that came with the previous system, which there was a lot of. Yes, many use this feature to berate and disparage low tours, but the vast majority of people, I'm talking like 95%, used it as a tool for guidance and coaching. It allowed knowledgeable players to offer pointers towards getting better at the game, both lessening potential issues for the current mission and sowing seeds of knowledge that'd be planted very early on in that new player's memory bank. Oftentimes, it wasn't even a high tour advising a new player on where they went wrong, but rather the new player inspecting the high tour of their own volition, looking at what they upgraded, and applying it towards themselves. That was the best way to get better at the game. Look at what the most experienced players are doing and copy them. But now, the quiet observer is all but a foreign concept, and the ability to silently parse out why a competent player is performing as such has become much more difficult. Hell, the problem gets even more fundamental than that. If no one's able to see your upgrades, how in the fuck is a new player supposed to learn that they're bad? No one in-game will be prompted to tell you because seeing your upgrades is now an impossibility, and the new players can't model off the high tour Harrys and recognize the discrepancies. So how are they supposed to make the better choices that won't get them kicked by toxic dickbags? The answer is, they can't unless they visit one of the few external sources that exist, oftentimes created by the same people who would incessantly kick them. But if they don't, the likelihood of these new players directly asking for advice plummets to the fucking ground because as far as they're concerned, their upgrades are perfectly fine. There's been no information presented to the contrary at least, and it might not be all that bad if you're just one guy in an orgy's worth of high tours, but what happens if you're a new player who joins into a game that has multiple people who haven't been pointed in the right direction? Wave losses, vote kicks, scapegoating, dead lobbies, all of their frequencies have just been dialed up to 11. This realization on my part is actually what prompted me to make the first dozen or so videos on this channel. The avenues for helpful communication had been reduced significantly, and the promotion of beneficial information was needed then, and is still needed now more than ever. Call it a silver lining if you want, I definitely will. But this came as a result of a problem that never should have existed in the first place. And this gets even worse when you remember that this is a game mode with upgrades that are either misleading or flat out broken. How many people are out there still still buying burn time for the flamethrower? How many people out there think metal regen is a good upgrade? How many people are maxing out sentry firing speed because no one could tell them by Tour 5 that it doesn't fucking work? This change has made the player base so much worse through no fault of their own, and has undoubtedly led to an increase in the aforementioned negative outcomes that have become standard for the new player experience. The low tours don't deserve this, but honestly, neither do the high tours. Look, I know you guys have heard the sensationalism on both ends. All low tours are lazy, apathetic players who think that asking you don't shoot the Uber medics is like saying they should have been aborted, while all high tours are brutish assholes forcing their way of playing the game onto everybody else. But that's really all it is. Sensationalism. The negativity bias in full effect. Most low tours do want to complete the mission efficiently, and most high tours are perfectly mellow. But it's undeniable that the difference in game sense among the two groups is stark. In fact, this was actually quantified in a 100-tour study conducted by DeWill. As to be expected, the competency of the low-tour player base was incredibly mixed, while for the high-tour players, all but one shit-faced demo were able to perform up to par. I bring this up not to laugh and throw tomatoes at inexperienced players, but simply to validate the assumptions that people will make on the back of one's tour count. If you see someone with 100 tours, it's fair to assume they know what they're doing, while if you see someone with 1 tour, it's fair to assume they won't be all that great. Should you be the exception to these rules, you're the one with the burden of proof on bucking the trend. This isn't a novel concept. Any job, any hobby, any game, it all starts with the baseline assumption, be it from yourself or others, that the early stages are a trial period. This won't be the case for everyone at everything, but when dissecting that possibility, you'll need some kind of evidence that points in that direction. So what evidence could new MvM players provide? How could they separate themselves from the noobish norm? By demonstrating they gained an understanding of how MvM as a game mode works. Best shown through class choice, loadouts, and especially upgrades. A man versus machine specific mechanic with multiple opportunities to fuck up. Getting that right is a good sign of things to come. To go back to the poker analogy for a moment, the ability to inspect upgrades is much akin to the flop. It supplies added information that allows for the negative preconceptions to be turned on their head. Most experienced players were, and still are, perfectly willing to play with a noobish team if it's shown they can understand the basics. This was a great thing, as even one non-toxic high tour would be enough to ensure the mission wouldn't go haywire. But in the current day, because veterans have had their ability to separate the wheat from the chaff removed, guess what happens? They follow the tendency. They follow the norm. Whereas before, high tours would often stick around to help new players because their upgrades heavily indicated they'd be perfectly sufficient, now they're folding those cards. They take one look at the average tour count and say, nope, fuck this, I'm out of here, usually creating a snowball effect that leads to a max exodus within minutes. I shit you not, when I had to record my MvM bingo video around half a year ago, there were periods where I had to re-queue over a dozen times in a row, because every time someone would immediately leave due to the group's lack of experience, of which my 0-tour alt account had seemingly contributed to. This wasn't the norm before the inspect change, but upon reflection, it makes complete sense as to why this is the new meta. Put yourself in the shoes of an experienced MvM player for a moment. Not the rage bait you find on YouTube that makes for good content, but your average, everyday, unproblematic high tour. When queued into a game of low tours, you're presented with two options. You can shut up, play the game, and potentially lose over and over again because you're on a team with people who have no clue what they're doing, or you can use your expertise to provide assistance and help things run more smoothly. Obviously, the latter is preferred, and this is where the removal of teammate inspection has really fucked things up. Prior to summer of 2021, all this took was a quick scan of your teammates' upgrades, pointing out where the issues lie, and doing another quick scan to see if they were fixed. That's it. Even that was too much effort for some of the more hasty players, but the majority were courteous enough to do this at least. Now, if you want to help out even one new player, you have to ask them what they've upgraded, wait for them to respond, point out the issues as you normally would, wait for them to reinvest, and then ask them to confirm that they got the right shit because there's no way to see it for yourself. Now imagine doing this for every single new player on your team for every round of MvM you queue into. And that's not even mentioning the deluge of people who will ignore or even be outright hostile to the idea of any kind of advice, which is a shockingly high amount. It's also not considering the fact that there are no region lock options for MvM servers, so language barriers still persist. Why would anyone want to deal with that? Why go through all that effort to help a group when there isn't even a guaranteed chance of success? It's way more time efficient to just hit the requeue button and shuffle the new deck of cards, I mean players. In the same way that noobs don't want to come home after a long day of work and spend hours failing on each mission, veterans don't want to spend their time cosplaying a super guide for literally every game they come into contact with. And if you think that's an unreasonable expectation, I don't know what planet you're living on. High tour Harrys deserve criticism when they act like whiny piss babies. But in my opinion, simply leaving a game if the average tour count is low doesn't fall under that umbrella anymore. Valve has made the prospect of helping new players so immensely tedious for no reason that the optimal choice has shifted away from helping new players and towards abandoning them. Really, who should I be mad at? The people abiding by basic human psychology and taking the new path of least resistance? Or the developers who tore up the old road and replaced it with the fucking wipeout course? In removing teammate inspection, Valve thought they'd also remove the presumptions that facilitated toxic interactions. But in reality, all it did was make players defer to the next best metric, the black and white, nuanceless tour count. Personally, I don't feel that incentivizing the further segregation of the player base based on that metric is good for the game in any way. It's definitely far more damaging than the odd toxic encounter. Not just on a level of creating more enclaves where stereotypes fester and generalities are left unchecked, but from a design and balance point of view as well. Low tour lobbies are constantly getting cock-blocked by brick walls that high tours could easily wrecking ball through, but they're no longer incentivized to stick around. Similarly, now high tours are more often getting paired up with each other, which turns the game mode into little more than cookie clicker with guns. Everything is just so optimized to the point of mundanity. I'm not saying that Valve built the Berlin Wall or anything, but it's undeniable that teams aren't as harmonious as they used to be. And if you're a victim of the high tour versus low tour sensationalism and are perfectly content with painting either side as wholly good or wholly bad, you probably think this is a great change. But that's wrong. The ability to inspect other players' upgrades was not the problem. It was more often than not the solution. It calmed a lot of potential flames between the noobs and the tryhards. And while it was also the impetus for many an argument, the majority of those interactions would have happened anyways, whether the system was in place or not. We lost the ability to expeditiously help new players, all in the name of short-sighted drama prevention. And as a result, I can't blame anyone who's opted to avoid playing with low tours. And the fact that I can say that with confidence is unfortunate more than anything. People will argue forever about what patch is the prime candidate for a revert, but to me, it's no contest. Removing teammate inspection was, and still is, the most brain-dead, naive, and meritless change that Valve has ever come up with for this game mode. If you want to actually diminish toxicity, everyone and their grandma knows what needs to change. It's nothing but a matter of who's willing to do it. Let's just hope that call is answered one day. See ya. Oh, and thank you to Dragon City for sponsoring today's video.